This is the second part of how to break down a literary analysis prompt, and I have 2 stories left for my last step in the process. So, Rose for Emily, how do I show the reader that Miss Emily, despite her obvious mental state, is a sympathetic character, that she's widely respected and regarded, that she's admired, she's been left alone so many times, and that the ending of the story and what she has done in the story isn't simply murder for murder's sake. So, where do I find the textual evidence to support those things for my reader? So, I know that she was widely respected and regarded because the whole town went to her funeral. They went in respectful affection for a fallen monument. When she was alive, she'd been a duty, a tradition, and a care. The text specifically says that the narrator points that out. We know that she was respected. She was called Miss Emily the entire story, which is a term of admiration and respect. How do I show that she is admired? The narrator clearly, obviously admires her ability to be able to vanquish her foes. The men that come to make her pay her taxes, and she sends them away. She vanquishes them, horse and foot, as the story says. They changing her. She refuses to change her mailbox. She sends those away. When she's asked to give a reason for buying the rat poison, she refuses, even though it was a legal requirement for anyone purchasing arsenic at that time to give a reason for purchasing arsenic. She had a tragic past, which we, with her father's death, and she refuses to give up the body of her father for like 3 days. But the townspeople don't label her as crazy because they believe that she had to do that. They remembered all the young men her father had driven away, and that with nothing left, she would have to cling to that which had robbed her. Rumors got around that the only thing that she had left was the house. And that was when they started to pity her, being left alone and a pauper. She'd become humanized to them. We know that she loved Homer because she purchased a silver set for grooming and had it engraved with his initials. The purchase of such a personal object solidifies that. And then the discovery of the body, which was horrifying, in and of itself, was tempered by the discovery of that indented pillow on the bed and that long strand of iron gray hair. She loved him when she killed him, as crazy as that sounds, and she continued to love him. It wasn't a black hair from when she was younger, from the time that she killed him. It was 40 years later. It was a hair from her head from the present. She refused to give him up. And so all of those things help us to see Miss Emily in a more humanized light and feel sympathy for her. So the last story, in Soldier's Home, how do I, as the writer, make Krebs seem a lot less like an asshole and more like a human being? He doesn't have the ability to love. He doesn't have the ability to pray. He doesn't have the ability to function. How can I show my reader, my audience, that through the text? So the first thing is that I know from my study of history that the Battle of Belleau Wood was one of the bloodiest, most catastrophic in terms of casualties in the history of war up until that point, and still continues to be one of the bloodiest battles that was ever fought with U.S. troops. And so that in and of itself has to change a man. That whole idea that they kept sending wave after wave of men across the field into oncoming machine gun fire, and 1,000 Marines were killed the very first day. That has to affect someone's mentality, to have to see that and witness that in terms of his state of mind. And people in the town seem to think it was ridiculous, which is an odd choice of words, ridiculous for Krebs to be getting back so late. And there was no welcome mat rolled out for him. There was no greeting of heroes. Everybody else that had come home before had gotten the parades and all of the honors and the celebration, and there was no one there to do that for him. Krebs felt the need to talk. in the beginning, but no one wanted to hear about it. No one was willing to sit down and listen to what he had to say. So he found himself having to lie just to be listened to, which over time, all those lies started adding up, and that caused a real sour taste in his mouth. And so he just stopped talking about it at all altogether. He also had to read about the war in history books in order to understand and make sense of what he'd been through. And there was no one to help him through this process, and think of it in terms of today's times. You have soldiers returning back from active duty, from active battle. They're reintegrated slowly back into normal society. There's a process for that. And there was nothing during that to help him during that transition. So he literally was picked up from that bloody battle, those experiences that he had, and dropped back into his old life with no ability to be able to transition from old Krebs to this new soulless Krebs, the shell of the former Krebs. So his parents rush him into moving on. He can't do, obviously, because you can't move on until you've fully recovered from your past, until you have closure and you let things go. He hasn't fully recovered, so he can't go forward. And they don't understand that. They think it's about time for him to get over it and get a definite aim in life like all the other boys who are on their way to being a credit to the community. And so here he is. He fought for his country. He watched his fellow man blown to bits, dying for his country, and yet that isn't enough to make him a credit to his community. He has to have move on and get a job and find a wife, and that will make him a credit to his community. So it's very skewed. But all of these things in conjunction help us see him not as someone who doesn't love his mother, who doesn't love anybody, who refuses to get a job and get on with it. We don't see him that way anymore. We see him for what he is. Home is no longer his home, and he is unable, because of what he's been through, to function after the war. And so we feel sorry for him. We feel sympathetic for him because no one seems to understand that. So now I'm ready to take all of those components and I'm ready to write about them. I have my ideas broken down. I understand my prompt fully. I have found the strongest textual evidence to support what I need to say to my reader in order to do that. And I'm ready to take those pieces and put them in an essay, building it together. I need to be able to introduce that. In an introduction for that, I need to talk about what third-person narration does for a story and why that's important, because that's what my prompt is asking for me to do. Then I need to address or introduce my 3 stories and my characters, and kind of shed a little bit of light on how the stories kind of would have been different if they were written from a different perspective, without going into too many details that I can give away in the body of my paper. And then I'm ready for a paragraph on a story, the story of an hour. I'm ready to talk about how third-person narration makes Mrs. Mallard seem more sympathetic in our eyes, or sympathetic to her plight, that she did love her husband, but she also had not had an identity under him, and so that his death would have actually been in many ways a relief for her, because she can now finally live her own life as Louise instead of Mrs. Mallard. I'm ready for another paragraph to talk about Miss Emily, and how, what she did, it was crazy. She poisoned her boyfriend so that he would never leave her, and then she slept with his body for the rest of her life. But once I've seen through the eyes of that third-person narrator that she was continually left alone, that her father had run off all of her other suitors. She's just like any other human being. No one thrives off of loneliness, like being alone. She did what she had to do to ensure that she would never be alone again. Was it the right way? Absolutely not, but we can still see that through sympathetic eyes, through that third-person narrator. And then my last body paragraph, I need to make Krebs seem more like a human being instead of this guy that he is just not over it already. He won't get on with it. He won't change and adapt to what's happening. It's time for him to get over the war. I make him seem more human to my reader by explaining the experience that he's gone through and how that's changed him and how people just didn't understand and he was unable to relate. He was unable to share that with them without lying about it. And he can't move on because he is not recovered from what he has been through. I need to fill all that out in that body paragraph and how third person narration helps us see that. And then in my conclusion, I'm ready to sum it back up. I'm ready to tie everything back together. I'm ready to provide my readers with closure, talking about, again, how a different perspective would have changed these stories and changed these characters, especially for us in our eyes. And then I'm ready to, reiterate that the third person narration helps us feel sympathy for these three characters, whereas if we had only been in their perspective, we would have judged them or felt differently about them. And then I'm ready just to tie everything together and close it out for my reader. So I hope this has kind of helped with your thinking process. If you'll get into the habit of writing the prompt down and breaking it down in these ways to make them easier to understand for you, you'll find that your writing process is going to be a lot easier.